Hey everybody, it's Skylar the Potter here. I'm gonna show you step by step how I make the mitten mugs. Grab a Michigan beer, I'd say a two-hearted, get comfy. Alright, this is how it starts. Cutting up some clay, weighing it, and getting it wedged up. This is standard 112, it's a speckled stoneware. Use it for just about everything. I'll weigh it out on a kitchen scale there. It's 1.5 pounds of clay for these mugs. It's important to start with the same amount of clay so you can get a consistent size. Getting it wedged up, getting all the air out, roll it up so it's nice, flatten it out so it's ready to go on the wheel. I like to use the square bats for smaller pieces like this. It saves space on the table once they're drying. So put a little moisture on the bat, press the clay down, and just get it all centered. That's the name of the game with this, bringing it up and bringing it down. Need it to be right in the center of the wheel head so that the walls are an even thickness when you start throwing it. If you've done pottery on the wheel before, you know that centering is half the battle. If you get something nicely centered, the whole throwing process goes so much smoother and easier. Once it's nicely centered, it's time to open it, create the base, bring it out flat. Don't want to go too deep, you want there to be a little bit of clay there at the bottom so the base doesn't get too thin. Compression of the base is also really important for added strength, so you don't get any S-cracks. This first pull is mostly with my left hand. Second pull, switch to the fingertips, pressing in from the outside and out from the inside, really lifting that clay. A little compression on the rim after every pull. So you're not trying to squeeze this clay and make it thinner, you're really lifting it from the bottom to get the height. It's all a matter of touch to get the right pressure. That throwing gauge is there as a reference so that I know when I've got the right height. It's a static point I can just use as a reference rather than having to use a ruler over and over again. Now that it's tall enough, it's time to compress the walls with a rib. Takes out some of the throwing lines, makes the surface nice and smooth. This is also a matter of touch, figuring out the right pressure that's needed without distorting the form too much. With a cylindrical form like this, it's really helpful to use a rib to straighten the sides out, make them nice and even. Once the ribbing is done, it's time to do a little upturn with the foot. I like to do this just as a little bit of a visual thing to separate it when it's sitting on a flat table. For this mug in particular, I knew I was going to make this video using it, so I am writing the one for YouTube on there. It is not subtle. It's just a rubber-tipped sort of pencil-shaped tool, but it doesn't poke through the clay. It's just nice for making marks. Use it for a lot of different things, but this is one of them. So pressing in with that tool distorted the form a little bit, so I round the rim back out, and then it's wired off and set aside to stiffen up for a while. Depends on the season. In the winter, it takes a little bit longer, like overnight, basically. The next step in the process is creating the Mitten Bar logo stamp out of white stoneware. It'll end up being attached to the side of the mug. I toss my slabs out like this because I don't have a slab roller. And tossing slabs out like this compresses the clay really well and makes it less likely to warp or move later on. I've never made pizza like this, but I'd imagine it's kind of like tossing out a pizza crust. It's flopped over with a directional pressure, then letting the weight of the clay itself stretch it out and get thinner. Once it's thin enough, it's time to dust off the old stamp. It's just a rubber stamp I had made. I use cornstarch as the releasing agent, so it's dusted on there. The stamp is pressed in with lots of pressure, and the cornstarch allows it to not stick to the clay. Comes off nice and clean. And the cornstarch just burns out in the kiln. Once I've put as many stamps as I can on that slab, I'll use a square cookie cutter to cut them out. Makes it way faster than using a knife. And also is helpful for making them all a consistent size. It's just like cutting out cookies. That's how it looks at that stage. I stack them up like that, and because of the cornstarch, they don't stick together. It's nice. So here's the mug again. It's been allowed to set up overnight. I can handle it without it distorting. To attach the stamp, it's just a matter of slipping and scoring. Good old slip and score. If you've taken pottery classes, you've probably heard your teacher say slip and score 1,000 times, but it really is the only way. The slip I'm using here is from the throwing bucket that I use for the white stoneware. Works well. It's always available. Place the stamp on there and press it gently but firmly. All the way around. All the edges. There's my little maker's mark. And each mug gets individually stamped with the member number. That's how they're able to find them at the bar. You walk in and this person will say, "I'm number 183. And the bartender will grab this mug, fill it up with something, and hand it over. This process can be a little bit tedious, but there's no way to do it faster than this. For this mug specifically, I added a second piece, a second square of white stoneware because a QR code is going to go on there that links to this video. It's all part of the plan, you'll see. Once it's dried for a couple more days, it's ready to go into the bisque kiln. It's just very dry clay at this point, and it's extremely fragile. Fast forward to the next day, it's out of the kiln, and it is now ceramic. You can hear how different the sound is when I'm tapping on it. The next step is to brush some very watered down underglaze onto the stamp so you can make out the logo a little bit better. I try and put it on pretty evenly, but definitely try and get into all of the pressed in parts of the logo so that those stay nice and dark. At this stage, the piece is pretty porous, so it sucks the water right out like a sponge. Right after that, I'll use a sponge to take away some of the color that's on the high points, but it leaves it in the low points. It's all in the name of higher contrast and more legibility. Once more around the edge to clean up any flecks or whatever, and we're ready to move on. The next step is to brush wax resist over the whole surface of the stamp. This is so when I dip the mug later in glaze, the stamp itself won't absorb that glaze. It'll stay bare. And this wax burns out in the kiln as well, so it just leaves bare clay. If I didn't do this, the glaze would cover it up and it'd be hard to read. Now it's time to glaze the interior. This is a glossy white glaze that I'm mixing up. I use it on the insides of all these mugs. Nice glossy surface. I found out the hard way that glazes that are not glossy can make the beer foam up pretty bad, so if you are a member that got one of those in years past, I'm very sorry. Pour it into the interior. Shake it around a little bit and do this fancy little pour out so it gets a nice even coat all the way around the inside. For this piece, I am going to be using a cobalt wash applied with a sponge. Believe it or not, the pink stuff that's in that jar mixed with water is called cobalt carbonate, and it's one of the best ways to get blue in the ceramic world. It's just weird that it looks so pink when it's in the raw form like that. So once that's had a little while to dry, it's time to glaze the outside. This is a really, really thin, clear glaze that I'm mixing up here. Just getting it real consistent, breaking up any weird chunks. It's not very glamorous, but it's the way that I do it. I make all my own glazes. It's a lot of chemistry that goes into it. a lot of trial and error. So because the interior is already glazed, I will dip it in upside down like this so it traps the air on the inside and only glazes the outside. Quick dip, nice and thin, because it is a clear glaze after all. I want that cobalt to show through. It's time for that wax resist to shine. See how easy it is to get the little bits of glaze off? It'd be just totally covered like the rest of the mug if I hadn't done the wax. Clean up any glaze that's on the bottom that'll cause problems in the kiln. And I sign each one with an underglaze pencil. The year that these are for and my little signature. Here we are back out in the kiln shed. It's time for it to go in the kiln. Looks empty here, but I put some more stuff into it. Fingers crossed, baby. And here's the big reveal. Hey, alright. Nice and blue. Looks alright. Looks pretty cool. It made it. For the QR code that links to this video, I made a water slide decal. Soak it in a little bit of water, and then the decal itself slides right off of the paper. It's hard to do this one-handed, so sorry about the camera work. I don't use decals very often, but sometimes it's cool. I did have to put it back in the bisque kiln for another firing to make it permanent, but I forgot to take video. It's not very exciting anyway. Here's how it looks when it's finished. Time to mark it off the list. This is my big master list, so I can stay organized and know what the heck's going on. There are 185 mugs, and I break it down into groups of 10. For the first 10, the theme is carved. So I'll use some sort of anything that makes some sort of a carving, any kind of cutting tool, carve into the surface. The next 10 is a collaboration with my wife, Charlie. She did all these underglaze paintings of different vegetables. Last year she did fruits. This year she did vegetables. I love these little pea pod things. It's my favorite one. Next is the birch bark theme. Wavy rim, organic surface. It's a perennial favorite. I like them too. The next theme is inlay. So I press or carve into the clay itself, put a bunch of slip over the whole surface, and then scrape the slip off so that it just stays in the low points. These were a stamp that I made. Bunch of stamps. Next theme is just wonky. Using a rib to make a bunch of weird ridges and bumps. Feels cool in the hand, that's for sure. All different. Very different on these ones. The next theme is hakame, which is brushing slip-on with a coarse brush. And it just creates really cool marks. I really enjoyed these ones too. I think it's a Japanese technique. Pretty sure. This theme I call fairy dust. I mix a bunch of wood ash with soda ash and a little bit of frit and put it on dry with a baker's sieve. A little bit of spray adhesive helps it stick to the pot. For these I used wax resist on the outside of the piece before I dip it in the exterior glaze. So everywhere that there's glaze is where the wax resist isn't. It's a weird process. These ones are faceted with some sort of a wire. I used a cheese slicer on this one. While the wheel was moving, I just dug a cheese slicer in there and followed it up. The glaze on that one is my favorite. I just love it. It's like weathered metal. Next is the theme where I don't use a rib on the outside. I just leave the throwing lines where they are. I really like these ones too. It's very simple. Feels good in the hand. A little spot for your fingers to rest in. This next set is ones that I didn't dip all the way into the glaze. So there's some bare clay exposed. Playing with that line where the clay meets the glaze. It's nice. For these I poured glaze on just one side and let it run along the other side. Really uneven, but it creates some motion, some dramatic drips and things like that. I like them. For these ones I altered the form and then drew in, loose geometric shapes with that same rubber tip tool. Create some nice motion, I think. For these ones I used a rib, and instead of smoothing it out, I really accentuated a spiral shape. I love how it's wiggling around and kind of dancing there. And that purple glaze is something special. For these I used the sgraffito technique, which is layering slip, contrasting slip, and then carving through it. So it's a white slip on top of a dark stoneware, and you carve through and it's nice and dramatic. With these I used a serrated rib or a comb to make some patterns. I think it turned out pretty well. It's pretty detailed. A lot of texture. With these I used a squirt bottle with watered down slip in it and just went to town. Different colors, different patterns. This one turned out particularly well. A lot of contrast. This is one of my favorites. Really thick slip. And that green just worked so well. It's a dark stoneware with the white slip. A lot of texture. I just love the way that those marks turned out. Something special for sure. And here's old 183, the one we've been watching this whole time. The last 5, because it's not a group of 10, I get to just do whatever I want. So that's why this one ended up in that group. QR code worked great. Here they all are at the Mitten Bar in Ludington, Michigan, ready to go. 185 mugs, all intentionally different, but within those themes that I break them up into. It's my favorite project that I do every year. There's my personal mug. I can't wait to get down there and use it. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you get down to the Mitten, tell them I sent ya. Peace easy.